Gather round. It's time for your Real Estate Chalk Talk with the Hittner Group at Coldwell Banker Burnett. Listen closely as your coaches discuss the culture, the economy, and the political scene, and how it affects your home and your real estate investments. Real Estate Chalk Talk is where you learn the science of buying and selling real estate and the art of living in your home. Your education begins in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey, welcome to the program. This is your Real Estate Chalk Talk. 612-627-8000 is the number to call. You got to use your words, Kelvin. He's sitting there pointing like we're supposed to know what he's talking about. He wants to turn the heat down in the studio. He's a little hot under the collar this morning. 612-627-8000, HittnerGroup.com, Hittner Group, all one word, HittnerGroup.com. Give us a ring-a-ling-a-ling. We'd be happy to help you with any of your real estate needs. And, of course, that first conversation is all with no cost and absolutely no obligation. 612-627-8000. We're going to get to real estate conversation a little bit later in the program. We got Kelly Keegan in the office, and she's a busy gal, so we want to make sure that we get as much time with her as we can. Attorney at law, and is an expert in firearm issues in the state of Minnesota. Have you hit every county yet?
I think I've hit about 48 out of the 87.
48 out of the 87.
Tomorrow I'll hit 49.
Okay, super duper.
Yeah.
So is there one in particular that you enjoy going to more than the others, or are they all pretty much the same?
You know, there is one that I enjoy going to. I don't really want to call it out.
Okay.
Because
why do you
I don't want to
enjoy
ruin a good thing. Because the judges there are very firearms friendly.
Okay.
And I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm doing firearms related cases, and so it helps to have a good audience.
This must not be Hennepin County.
It's not Hennepin County,
can't be
although
Hennepin.
Hennepin County's gotten better.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Hennepin and Ramsey have gotten a bit better, actually. You wouldn't think so, but they've gotten a bit better in these days in terms of understanding the human side of this, and meaning people, my clients, I have defendants, right? I'm a defense attorney.
Sure.
So I'm dealing with people who want firearms, who have had some indiscretions and had some problems and are now kind of climbing back from that. And so they understand that a little bit more in this day and age, I think.
Is it the only area of law you practice, or can you just touch on before Keith goes down rabbit holes of things? Give us the broad scope of, like, what is your practice? What do you hit?
Yeah. So I'm a criminal defense attorney by trade.
Okay.
I obviously handle criminal cases. I do a lot of firearms-related cases, a lot of self-defense type cases. There are a group of attorneys in Minnesota who are vetted by a couple of different firearms groups. The United States Concealed Carry Association is probably the largest. And we are known as attorneys who specialize in Second Amendment law issues.
Okay.
So they have a response team. Their insurance plans will hook us up, people that call and are in some sort of crisis or situation. They can shuffle them to people that they have vetted previously. We're not associated with them. We don't get any kind of kickbacks or any kind of affiliation, but they've vetted people and know that they have this response team where they can kind of send people to the right place.
Right.
So that, but I also do a lot of really interesting other kind of offshoots related to firearms. I've been doing a lot of cases where people will go attempt a purchase of a firearm, and then the NICS, the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, will shut people down. Either they deny the transaction, they get delayed, and so I work with people to try to fix that and kind of...
What are some of the reasons for that?
Oh, there's a whole bunch of reasons. What's interesting is the NICS section has historically been very slow to respond to things. When you get denied a transaction, you can actually ask for the reason of why you're being denied. And the feds will give you a reason, and it depends on how much information. If you submit your fingerprints, they'll tell you the exact reason. If it's a case, for example, like a domestic case that you have previously or a felony case that you have previously, they will pinpoint the exact case. But if you just submit a request with your email saying the reason, they'll just cite a statute. So they'll say, well, here's this cryptic statute under federal law. For example, they'll say, we're denying you because of 18 United States Code 922G9, which some people may know as the Lautenberg Amendment. It means domestics. But when somebody gets that and they're a layperson, they're like, what is this?
Yeah.
And so they call me and say, I'm frustrated. And I'll tell you, a lot of people just bang their head against the wall. It's very frustrating dealing with the feds sometimes. But they have historically taken a really long time to respond. And what I'm seeing lately is that they've hired a slew of new people. So the response time is much more rapid,
Mm-hmm.
but
What's rapid mean in your world?
a couple weeks. I mean, we're talking it
weeks
used
is
to be a couple
rapid?
months to a couple of years for people in the
Really?
feds to respond. Yes, it was very frustrating. So now
Wow.
we're dealing with at least a few weeks. If you ask for the reason for the denial, now you can, if you do it via email, you can get it sometimes within a few hours.
Okay.
So the feds, though, they've hired this new slew of people, and what I'm seeing is that I appreciate the quicker response time, but I think the training hasn't quite caught up to speed because they're now flagging things
Sure.
that are clearly not a prohibitor. If they have any question whatsoever, if it's something that they consider a potential prohibitor, or they're missing a T crossed or an I dotted, they don't have a discharge date from somebody for what date they got done with probation on a case. They're like, oh, we don't know what's going on with this case. And so they flag people. So I'm getting a lot of those calls and helping people overcome some of those barriers. And it's very frustrating for people. I'm also doing a lot of gun rights restoration cases. So people who lose their gun rights, it's clear that they've lost their firearm capabilities. And so
What
I'm
makes it
helping
clear?
them. They have a disqualifying felony. So
Okay.
in Minnesota, one of the common misperceptions is that people who have any felony conviction have a lifetime prohibition on possessing firearms. Not true. In Minnesota, we divide felonies into two categories. There's crimes of violence and non-crimes of violence. If you have any felony conviction, you lose your gun rights while you're serving your sentence. But when you're discharged from your probation or parole, we divide people into two categories. If it's a crime of violence, you lose it for life, and you have to go back to court and have a judge issue an order restoring it. If it's not a crime of violence, you actually get your gun rights back despite having a felony conviction. But I will say this. People think crimes of violence. Okay, well, that means that if I did something violent, then I'm prohibited. But if
Right.
it's something I didn't, it wasn't violent, then I'm not. It's not intuitive. Drug possession is a crime of violence in Minnesota. Doesn't have even an identifiable victim. So you can't necessarily go off of, well, gee, this is violent or that's not. There's a list of offenses in Minnesota that will prohibit people. So when you do have a crime of violence conviction, I can help people. We'll go back to court. We'll go in front of a judge and make a case that they should have their rights restored. Domestics are a little bit different. That's another big one. But domestics are a different animal than the felony prohibitions.
Let's hit your phone number and contact information a few times as you're talking. People are probably like, oh, wow, I wonder how I could reach her.
KeeganLawOffice.com. KeeganLawOffice.com.
How do you spell Keegan? No, I could be-
Keegan Law, L-A-W, Kelvin, L-A-W.
Thank you.
Office, OFFICE.com.
Thank you.
The dot is a period.
Thank
for
you.
those of you from Iowa. KeeganLawOffice.com, 612-584-3834. And Kelvin, there are dashes between that 612 dash
I don't have to put 'em in.
584 dash 3834, but you don't type that in on your phone pad when you're calling.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so you've been to all the counties. Have you seen a change generally in attitude, I guess I will, over gun issues as of late?
One of the questions I get asked is, and this happens every time there's a mass shooting or something going on and with firearms, one of the questions I get asked is what's happening politically going to affect my case? The answer I usually say is no. And I appreciate that because, the courts are not supposed to be wrapped up in all
Right.
the politics involved. Judiciary is supposed to be this independent, neutral
But
arbiter.
they're still people.
They're still people. Every now and then you get a judge that I suspect has some strong views on firearms, anti-firearms, and I tend to avoid those judges.
Okay.
We have the ability oftentimes to file a removal on a judge, no questions asked. There's
Oh,
one,
really?
yeah, and so we
I
can.
didn't know
Is there a blacklist then that you circulate throughout the
No, I
community?
wouldn't say there's a blacklist, but interestingly enough, there is one judge, and I really respect this, who is very vocal about distaste for firearms.
Okay.
And so if I get that judge assigned on a case, that judge has said, you don't even need to burn up your removal. I will recuse myself.
Okay.
I can't be neutral. I can't be impartial on this. And
Too
so I'll
strong of feelings. about
Wow, that's good.
it.
yeah, and that's what I say. I respect that. Thank you. And that's what a judge is hopefully supposed to do. But generally, the politics and the current events don't impact what I'm doing in the courts that I see. I see it. A lot of clients and people that call me up say, the climate's getting terrible. They're going to take away our guns. And I'm
Sure.
like, they're not going to take away your guns. What I do see is the feds tend to clamp down on things a little bit more. And when I say that is both the Congress at the federal level as well as the state legislature have a very difficult time passing gun laws. They're very controversial. So there really hasn't been much that's changed on the legislative level. Court cases, there have been some things that have come out that have been very interesting and changed the landscape. But in general, the political climate doesn't really impact what we're doing. It's more of, I'm dealing with human beings. We're dealing with defending cases. We're dealing with restorative, people who are rehabilitated and should be able to get their life back kind of situations.
The law is the law until it's changed, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's
go by the letter of the law, hopefully, for the most part.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the courts do, I think, a pretty good job at following the law.
Cool. We're going to head to break. More when we return with Kelly Keegan. KeeganLawOffice.com. Google it. It'll come right up, Calvin. It's no big deal.
Thanks, buddy.
612-627-8000 is our phone number. Or log onto our website at any time at hittnergroup.com, HITTNER group.com, and we'll be right back.
Okay, we got Kelly Keegan on the program. I got a question for you, Kelly.
Yeah.
So I'm a upright, guy standing in my house, and I met this gal at the bar the other night, and she's got a felony. I didn't realize it, but she does. So she's going to live with me, and I own a gun. Mm-hmm. Is that a problem?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
With his wife, Sheila.
Well,
start there. And
Sheila's
then
a derelict.
Gets kind of kinky.
It's a good question. I get asked this question actually a lot because I get calls from people who are looking at having their rights restored. We determine that they are prohibited. And so one of the next questions is, until I can get this fixed, what do I do? Because I live with people who have firearms, or I want to live with people who have firearms, and I don't want to be considered in possession of those firearms, but I also don't want to restrict the other people and tell them they can't have firearms. They're perfectly law-abiding.
So who's it a problem for? Is it for the person who owns the firearm or the felon?
It's a problem for the felon.
Okay.
And we're I say felon, but it's also people who have a domestic conviction that's a misdemeanor. I mean, there's lots of things that can prohibit people. You can lose your firearms for renouncing your citizenship, for being dishonorably discharged from the military, for being committed, obviously, as mentally ill and or chemically dependent. I mean, there's a long list of things that can prohibit people. Having a restraining order active against you. But at any rate, so it's a problem for the person who's restricted generally because that person has all the liability. You don't want to be considered in possession of a firearm if it's, first of all, if it's not yours. It shouldn't be yours,
right.
Hopefully, but you're going to be the one in trouble. And so the question becomes, what do we do with this? If you have a firearm in the home, Minnesota law, and frankly just law in general, says we have this concept of constructive possession. Obviously it's illegal to have a firearm in your hot little hand, right?
Right.
But constructive possession says that I am in control of the articles that are in my home, in my vehicle, right? If I'm driving my vehicle and I've got a gun on the floorboards, it's presumed that that's my gun and I'm possessing it. I tell people, think of it like a TV, right? You don't walk around with a TV in your hand all day.
Yeah.
But people would say, Kelly Keegan's got a TV. Yeah, she's got a TV in her home. She owns and possesses a TV. Sure. Same type of concept. Constructive possession is saying you're still in control and possession of the things that are in your home and your vehicle in particular.
But what if I have somebody living with me and the TV is in my room where I stay and I live in this room, and then the other individual that's living in the house, it's not a common area, right? It's like my personal bedroom. They have their own personal bedroom, and then we have common space within the home. Mm-hmm. The gun is in my room. The TV's in my room. He doesn't have a TV, or she doesn't have a TV or gun in her room.
Problem. You're the prohibited person, or you're the legal person?
I'm legal.
Okay, you're the legal person. Yeah. So
okay for me, but what about this other person?
So here's what constructive possession says. It says you can't be in a position where you're exercising control over that firearm. And so you leave a gun out on the counter in the common space, right? They can attempt to attribute that firearm to you. And what they'll do is they'll actually do DNA testing. They'll swab that firearm and see if your DNA is on there, which can be also very dangerous because DNA is all over everything, especially if you live in a place.
Sneeze.
But so what I tell people to do is, take precaution, and what they should do is try to put as much space between you and that firearm in terms of them attributing it to you as possible. The best way to go about it would be to get some sort of biometric safe. Have a gun safe. Have the firearms put in the safe, and have it be a biometric safe is where the person who's opening it needs a thumbprint or some kind of biometric information. Sometimes they can do like retina scans, but I think that's pretty advanced at this point. Mostly thumbprint. And so that person, it becomes clear the person who's accessing the firearms is the legal person, not the prohibited person. The most scary kind of line crossing situation that I've seen come out of the Court of Appeals, and the case escapes me. I want to say it's Hagen. I'll get it for you. But the case is a case where a gentleman was renting a room, a bedroom in a home. He did not own the home. So he's renting this bedroom, and inside that bedroom was this sort of makeshift gun safe. It was more so a locked file cabinet. It was undisputed that he didn't have access to the file cabinet. There were keys associated with it. He didn't have the keys. And the firearms inside were not his firearms. I think they were his girlfriend's. But the court still ruled that he was in constructive possession of those firearms because he could control who could come in and out of that bedroom. It was his bedroom. It wasn't her bedroom. And so they said, you're still exercising control over these firearms, even though you can't necessarily physically touch them and get them out of this file cabinet. You're still exercising control over those firearms. That's the issue, is you cannot be a person who's exercising control of those firearms. And so I tell people to take precautions. Mainly what I tell people is...
How did that end up?
He ended up, his conviction stood. He appealed his conviction.
Okay.
Saying I shouldn't have
Because he had control over her.
Well, I don't know about her. But
Well, it was a girlfriend. I mean, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, the issue is that her firearms were in his room, and it was his room. And so they're like, it's in your space. So it's a little bit frightening. I tell people the safest way to go about it is to just have a third party off-site hold the firearms until you can get this fixed.
Go back to Keith's scenario here now. So he's got a house in that same situation.
Like I have my guns in a safe next to my nightstand that I have a code to, whatever.
And so he rents a room out to somebody,
Yep.
right? And that person that he rents the room out, they don't even know he's got a safe in his room.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like you talk about it. Oh, by the way, I've got a safe full of guns up in my bedroom.
Right.
Right. So it's just a conversation that never comes up.
A couple of 9s of 45.
Yeah. So then all of a sudden the something happens. It could be anything. You know, a medical emergency or something like that. They come in there and they see the guns in there, and the coppers are there, and they're like, you know, who all lives in the house? They write it down. And they're like, got a problem here. How's that work?
You should be okay in that situation. I mean, the person who's renting the room from you or living with you
Has no knowledge.
Well, it has no knowledge, but also you couldn't say is exercising control over those firearms. So I'll give you another scenario. You're driving a vehicle, you're legal, and you have a firearm on you. Or let's say you're even the passenger in a vehicle and you're carrying legally and you have a firearm on your person. The person whose vehicle you're in, who's driving, turns out they're prohibited from possessing firearms. Even though it's in their vehicle, it'd be really difficult for law enforcement or prosecutors to say that person who's illegally, can't have firearms is possessing your firearm. It's on you. You're the one that's exercising control over that.
I think that would probably be
clear.
a pretty, not rare, but common scenario, right? Where you maybe have somebody that has had some decisions that they made in the past that prohibit them from having a firearm, and then your buddy's in the car with you and they do have a firearm. The police officer in that situation is probably going to be like, whoa, you're in trouble, because there's a firearm in your vehicle. Mm-hmm.
But
and that can be a sticky situation.
Yeah, I mean, certainly.
Because I know a lot of police officers, and they don't know the law always as much as somebody in your position would.
Well, people always say, am I going to get in trouble? Or what they'll say is, am I going to get arrested for this? And I'm like, well, I can't guarantee you won't get arrested,
Right.
but I can guarantee that it probably won't be an issue once it gets to court. But do you want to really fight that fight?
Right.
Take precautions. But, in the situation where somebody has it on their person, it's all about who is exercising control or could be exercising control over that firearm. If it's clear that it's not the prohibited person, you're probably going to be okay. But if it's, the person who's in the vehicle that has their firearm who's legal and takes it out and decides to put it in the glove box, Big problem. Big problem. Yeah.
What do you know about, or what do you hear about some of these communities around the country, big cities and stuff, that have very restrictive gun, right? You can't get a permit unless you, give them a DNA sample and prove that you absolutely need one.
Yeah. We've
that's state by state, though, right?
It is. There are, states have obviously permit to carry laws.
Yeah, and there's some reciprocity between states.
There are some that are not. I have a lot of clients that get into trouble who bring a firearm into the state of Minnesota and who have a permit perhaps in their own state but didn't do their research and didn't realize there's no reciprocity with Minnesota. We have an interesting case that came out of the Supreme Court in June of this last year. It's called the Bruin case. It's the New York Rifle Association versus Bruin. And it really calls into question a lot of the permit to carry statutory schemes in different states. There are a number of states, and I forget what the number is, I think 7 or so, that had laws on the books that say people have to demonstrate a need for having a permit to carry. They have to demonstrate a need for carrying a firearm out in public. And the Bruin case struck that down and said you can't infringe on someone's Second Amendment right. It kind of expanded what we call the Heller case that talks about you have a Second Amendment right to have firearms in your home for self-defense, for protection. It's a constitutional right, can't be infringed. This extended that into public places. And so there were some states that had restrictions saying, I have to go in and demonstrate a need for it. I have to sort of deal with this subjective criteria of, gee, please, Mr. Sir, can I have a firearm in public?
Right.
And the Supreme Court struck that down and said, you can't infringe on someone's Second Amendment rights. And how this relates to Minnesota is there are obviously a group of us that handle firearms laws. And we're looking at certain cases at this point to perhaps challenge Minnesota's concealed carry permit laws. We're a shall issue state, meaning if you go in and you're not prohibited, you should be issued a firearm. But there's one exception, which is the sheriffs can make a determination if someone is a danger to themselves or others and decide the person shouldn't have a firearm or shouldn't have a permit.
We'll explore that more when we come back.
Yeah.
Hey, welcome back to the program. This is your Real Estate Chalk Talk. 612-627-8000 is the number to call. 612-627-8000. I got a question for you. We're with Kelly Keegan, KeeganLawOffice.com, 612-584-3834. If you're in trouble with the law and you need a little criminal defense, give Kelly a ring-a-ling-a-ling. That first call and first conversation may not be at no cost and no obligation, but we'll see what.
Probably will be.
All right. I got a question. So you mentioned the New York case.
Yeah.
The Second Amendment is obviously part of the Constitution. It's a national thing. Why is it that then states? Well, why is it then states have their own individual tweaks of things? Why wouldn't there be a national conceal and carry permit?
Well, 50 states are 50 states. I mean, we have the other amendments that talk about states have individual rights and can make their own laws. I mean, especially when it comes to police functions. So we get this patchwork. But in general, the Constitution is the highest law of the land, and so it's going to supersede things. And so that's how you get these laws that get struck down. States can do what they want and make laws, but it has to pass the muster of the Constitution. And that's how you get laws that get struck down.
Except for marijuana, where in some states it's legal, in some states it's not, and it's still federally a crime, right?
Correct, yes.
So
We've got that patchwork.
How does that tie in?
Yeah, we've got that patchwork. And, Minnesota, what are we right now? What's today? January 11th, 12th? January 12th, 2023, I think this is going to be the year where we pass marijuana in the state of Minnesota. The legislature has introduced. There was a hearing yesterday in the House. It passed out of the committee, and they have said they will pass it this year. And so,
to what end? What's the purpose of passing that?
Recreational. Minnesota is a medical marijuana prescription allowed state. But, to talk about marijuana, it's interesting because I get a lot of calls, too, from people who say, well, now I have my medical marijuana prescription, and which may soon be recreational use. What do I do? Can I have my concealed carry permit? Can I have firearms in my home? And the answer is you have to choose. You can't have both because under federal law, a person who is an unlawful user of controlled substances is prohibited from possessing firearms, even having them. And under federal law, marijuana is not legal. It is a Schedule I controlled substance. It is an illegal controlled substance. And if you are a user of that, you are prohibited, according to the feds, from having firearms.
So even if Minnesota passes marijuana recreationally, it doesn't change the federal law.
Correct.
Right? Because we still have federal law that states that it's illegal. Mm-hmm. So then possessing a firearm wouldn't change then if it's recreationally passed in Minnesota, correct?
Correct. Even if we recreationally legalize marijuana entirely in Minnesota, you still have to choose. Do you want your guns or do you want your weed? Mm-hmm. Because of the federal laws. What if your guns
are locked? Yeah. You just can't have them in your possession at all.
Correct. If you are an unlawful user.
It's totally different than alcohol because Prohibition, that's done. Mm-hmm. Right?
Alcohol is that you can't carry a firearm if you're .04. Or I take that back. It's more than .04. Right. So if you're .04 on the nose, you're okay.
You're good.
But it's
perfect.
But
it's in possession, right? It's like you can. I smoke weed, but I'm not smoking weed right now. I still can't have a gun. It
becomes the question of who's an unlawful user of controlled substances. Mm-hmm. I mean, and furthermore, it becomes if it's in your system versus if you're just using it. Meaning, if I'm dealing it to people, am I using it? The feds. No. There's some cases that say yes.
Oh, really?
But that's an issue of contention. It's
you're using it to generate revenue.
Yeah, I mean, you're a user of marijuana. Right.
You're also selling an illegal substance, so you're you're breaking the law.
Yeah, well, that too.
That's another one.
That too.
Boy, now we're getting all.
So the guy on the corner selling methamphetamine, if he's carrying a gun, he's He broke the law twice there.
He's an unlawful user of controlled substances.
I
and
wonder if
therefore
these people know
prohibited.
this stuff.
I know
Yeah,
it.
we should tell them.
We should tell them that they should not do that.
Chemicals and guns, bad.
Mm-hmm.
That's good enough.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see though how this shakes out in Minnesota, because I get calls from people. What am I going to do? I've got my medical marijuana prescription and I want to get a permit. I'm
That's
like,
such BS.
you got to choose.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about no gun signs at locations and what talk about that a little bit, because if I'm exercising my Second Amendment right and I enter a business that has a paper sign on their front door, what's going on?
Well, do you mean what's going to happen to you?
Yeah,
I can
what's-
tell
yeah,
you know
what's
what the
going on?
punishment is?
What is it?
It's a $25 fine.
Okay.
It's a petty misdemeanor. I don't know if people know that, but the penalty is extremely not severe.
So you
Because Minnesota's an open carry state, right? I mean, I can have a gun on my hip at a restaurant, right?
I think you're probably going to get some police calls if that happens.
That's not what I'm asking. I'm sure people will be uncomfortable if I have my firearm on my hip, but you don't have to conceal your weapon.
We don't have any laws saying you have to conceal your weapon. I think culturally, it's people get kind of freaked out. I've had
But that's
cases.
They may
not
think
what
you're
I'm
a
saying.
cop.
Not-
They may
not-
think you're a cop.
That's not what I'm saying.
I understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
It is not.
try it.
It's
Call me.
It's not illegal, right?
No, it's not illegal.
So if somebody
But if
did
I'm doing
call-
this, then you're threatening somebody.
Yeah, really.
Terroristic threats.
Terroristic threats. So if you're sitting there eating your bacon and eggs in the morning and you got a 45 on your hip,
There's
showing,
nothing wrong with that.
and somebody calls the cops, they're going to come in probably and say, "Look, buddy."
Well, the first question is going to be, does that person have a permit to carry?
Yeah.
You better have a permit to
Assuming
carry.
he does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But other than that, no.
Yeah.
That's,
So with the
you can do
police,
that.
when someone calls the police, what are they going to do?
Police probably. I mean, depends on
They'll
what
come and
jurisdiction
ask
too.
to
But
see your permit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's all they're gonna do.
Yeah.
And then you pull it out and you'd be like, "Here, we're good."
Yeah, we're good.
yeah.
Like, okay. You're making people uncomfortable. I'm like, oh, okay.
Maybe they should leave.
Yeah, I'm just gonna have my coffee and go.
Yeah.
I had a client who got in trouble for that, went to go eat at a Denny's or something, had a firearm. People called the police. He was from South Carolina. He didn't really understand culturally that you probably shouldn't be flashing your firearm around. And so people got alarmed. And the police came, and it turns out that his permit that he had in South Carolina had no reciprocity here. So gross misdemeanor carrying a pistol without a permit.
Yeah.
So, you know.
do people get so hung up on these gun laws that they will do? Because that's kind of just like, in my opinion, kind of a dumb thing, right? It's an ego thing, or I'm going to carry my gun because I'm a bit. How about just not do that? Because then you create this, then they have to call you. You're not free, and all of a sudden we're spending all this money for just dumb ego stuff.
Yeah, and the chances that you're
Right.
going to be some like landmark Supreme Court case, or
Right.
that's not a good bet to make. You know.
They'll be happy when the guy breaks into the spot and wants to steal things, starts shooting people, and I got my gun on me.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Well,
but you're
it
just
happens-
nervous, and you're going like this, and you're
Exactly,
spraying.
shaking.
Cool as a cucumber.
Cool as a cucumber. Well, when someone comes in, there is a issue with that. It's like prevention or deterrence. When someone comes in, he's going to rob the jewelry store, and there's a guy sitting down at the end of the counter there, another customer with a 45 on his hip.
This just happened.
Yeah,
Did
did
you
it?
see it?
No.
There's a it's all over the internet. There's a
Yeah, they
guy,
shot that guy in the yeah.
The guy, he came in and he was robbing people and taking cell phones and jewelry, and as he turned his back, one of the guys that was there took out his gun and shot him.
Yeah.
The problem is this: they're looking for this guy. He's hiding. They want him to bring him up on murder charges because he didn't just shoot him and
Shot him in
disable.
the back,
He
didn't
shot him in the well. That's I guess even probably more defensible, but because you got to but he shot him 9 times, and he
Yeah.
went up and shot him point blank range, and he was like,
Oh,
I mean,
that's
this
a
is
little
an
overkill.
executioner.
Yeah.
So that's the
He had
problem.
him down. He could have just let him bleed out, but he decided to finish the job.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
the problem. It's
That's
like
there are nuances there. Like
Yeah.
to
Empty the clip.
are you is your life in immediate danger?
Right.
Right.
It's Minnesota
Is
has a couple principles when it comes to self-defense. There has to be an imminent threat.
Mm-hmm.
Can't be something that happened yesterday. That's just revenge. It has to be that you have a duty to retreat. So you have a duty to try to stop the situation without the use of that force. And then that comes up with the next principle, which is you have to use a reasonable amount of force. The 2 things that people get into the most trouble with are duty to retreat. This has to be a last resort, truly, that you're going to use self-defense.
That's the law we got to get rid of.
That's some states, Florida, for example, doesn't have that. It's stand your ground. But and the other way that people get into trouble is the unreasonable use of force. That guy with the 9 shots, it's an unreasonable use of force.
3 would have been
That's why
good.
he's in trouble. You know, just something to stop the attack. The idea
Right.
is that you can use an amount of force, even lethal, as long as it stops the amount of or stops the attack that's happening, and then no more.
And that's so nuanced. I mean, every situation is going to be different. And you can go down like, I'm coming down the stairs and I have nowhere to retreat but upstairs, and there's nowhere to go but upstairs but out a window, and that's going to be harmful to me and my kids, so you're done.
Your home is going to be they're going to give you a little bit more leeway. I mean, we don't have the castle doctrine in Minnesota, which basically says you can use a lethal amount of force in your home if they even just come in, regardless of what kind of that threat they're posing to you. But we also give people a lot more leeway. There's no real duty to retreat in your own home. You have nowhere to go. So
okay, so you're fine when you come running out with the shotgun.
But you can't chase him in the yard and shoot him 3 more times.
Correct.
You know, here's the question though: if you shot him,
seconds.
once and he's down, it's when did he die? If he's dead and you're shooting a dead corpse, then that's not murder.
Well, I think again, it's like how are you going to prove that?
I don't know.
You're
That's
gonna
what the
have to prove that
autopsy is about. Which was the lethal shot?
In a court of law in front of a jury. That'll be
Muzzle
fun.
flare all over.
Yeah, which is the lethal shot?
Like this guy was about 3 inches from his face. All right, we're gonna end on that deal. I'm gonna give your contact
call us
information
immediately.
here. KeeganLawOffice.com. KeeganLawOffice.com. Thanks for coming in, Kelly.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
Give us a call anytime at 612-627-8000 and log on to our website, hittnergroup.com, HITTNER group.com. We'll be right back.